Chapter 5, Freedom of Expression, Part 2 of 4, Torts and Negligence. The learning outcomes include evaluate liability and negligence under U.S. law, and determine organizational liability for products or services offered. Let's look a little more closely at what a harm is. When you harm someone, the law calls that a tort. It's an unwanted intrusion on a protected personal right that causes some sort of harm. It may be physical harm, you may hit them in the face. It may be economic harm, you may steal money from them, or you may falsely advertise and cause them to buy something. Or you can harm them psychologically. Perhaps they've got post-traumatic stress disorder after whatever happened to them. There has to be someone who's negligent when a tort is committed, and this is when a person is less careful than our reasonable person should be, and harm results. The law in the U.S. uses the Restatement of Torts, and this is the second Restatement of Torts. It says there are criteria you use to evaluate negligence. You determine the proper standard of care required under the circumstances. For instance, a doctor has a higher standard of care for my health than you do, unless you're a doctor. Their police officers have a higher standard of care to help someone who is injured than you or I do. And then you determine, did they do what they should have done under those circumstances, given all we know about them? There are 3 other aspects that are also required prior to it being determined that you are negligent. You must cause some injury, psychological, physical, or economic. Community standards and policies must make the person responsible for the harm caused by the negligence. They did something, they themselves did or should have done something that they did not do. They were the proximate cause of your injury. And there may be no defenses that limit liability. If there are defenses, you may be able to prosecute or sue in civil court multiple people or companies. If you'd like to know more about tort law, I encourage you to look at this YouTube video, which is short, just gives you a little overview of it. You do look at who caused a negligent event if it happened. You say, would the injury have occurred if this negligent act had not occurred? If 2 or more parties are involved, you may sue one of them, both of them, all of them, whatever you choose. In many states, in some states there are limits. You may sue and say this person was more at fault than this one, but both of them were negligent, and you may sue them for partial damages. Some states do limit liability only to the proportion of harm that I caused. So you can only sue me for the amount of harm that I caused, not for more than that. That's true in some, but not all states. Liability must only extend to what a reasonable person could have foreseen as harming you. So if something occurred many months later, or something occurred even seconds or minutes later, and the person, and I'm not negligent, I couldn't foresee that I might have been negligent, then I'm not going to be held liable. Some defenses to liability for negligence, well, the defendant or defendants are usually going to claim you are negligent too. You contributed to the harm. There is a way to measure comparative fault with the damage recovery reduced by the amount of blame that's relevant. So again, whatever proportion of harm I caused, I am liable for. Organizations that produce products or services are subject to federal guidelines on strict products liability. The seller is at fault for any harm results to me from a product that was in defective condition and was dangerous to me. Unreasonably dangerous indicates more than just harm. It was an unreasonable harm that a reasonable person would not have expected. It does not limit me to pursuing simply the manufacturers, but anybody who sold me that defective product. So if you get injured from a product, you may sue any seller of the product within the distribution chain, whether you dealt directly with them or not. So all throughout the chain, it can be extended a great deal. That's why when there are recalls, they do their very best to get it out to people in many different ways. Some examples where liability may be a problem. The Apple iPod, when it first came out, the first version before the iPhone. Well, guess what? If you turn the volume up too far, it may cause hearing damage. Seems pretty obvious to me and most people using headphones. Apple does include a warning about the dangers, probably in small print, that many of us never read. Apple offers software that will allow the user to lower the volume so you can only go up to a certain amount. They tried to therefore lessen the risk from injury. They probably have still been sued for this. Probably the most famous one is the McDonald's coffee case. In this case, they looked at the gravity and risk posed by the product. Well, it's hot, so you assume it could be dangerous. How did they provide a warning? They probably put on their cups, coffee may be hot. Is it easily seen and appropriately intense? Is it big and bold and exclamation? What user groups are going to be using this product? You don't have to warn about risks that are generally known by foreseeable people who use the product. Now, the McDonald's coffee case is also often used as an example of a case gone wrong. Well, of course the coffee was hot. Of course she should have known. Take a look at this video if you get a chance. The person with the coffee was an elderly woman in the passenger seat. Her son-in-law got a coffee for her and him. They didn't have drink cups in their car at the time. They pulled over and parked to add cream and sugar to her coffee. She knew she couldn't do it while she was moving. And she spilled the coffee and had third-degree burns that seeped into her tracksuit, which stuck to her body. She had severe, severe injuries. It turns out McDonald's was keeping the coffee at 140 degrees, I believe, which was higher than industry standards and would cause a burn, and they knew it. They were doing it so it would stay hot longer. They served it anyway. Even after they knew that it was too hot, they wanted to keep it longer. They wanted to have fresh hot coffee for everybody, so they kept it a little hotter at first. So they didn't follow industry standards. They were too hot. Now this older woman, she asked McDonald's to pay for her medical expenses, which were around $20,000. She explained what happened. McDonald's said no. So she was awarded quite a bit of money and punitive damages as well for pain and suffering. If McDonald's had simply settled with her and paid the medical expenses and changed their practices, it would not have been a problem. To summarize, torts are evaluated based on the harm suffered, whether that harm is physical or psychological. Negligence is evaluated when determining harm and whether or not a tort has been committed. Those companies that are found to be negligent are going to have higher damages assessed against them than companies who attempt to overcome negligence issues. It's important, therefore, that companies identify all potential harms and make sure the consumers are properly warned. If a product or service is found to be defective, then everyone within the supply chain may be sued and held liable for damages suffered. So it is imperative for organizations to understand their supply chain partners and to ensure that they're following similar guidelines to limit the liability of suits brought against them.